earlier, and this is just true of so many of our businesses, but in particular this business, which is that our business leaders are they are leaders in business, but they're so much more than that. They're civic leaders, community leaders, role models, the people who nurture and who take care of the community and create a warm and safe place for folks to go. And there's nothing like going to the barbershop to know what's really happening. I always say to my team, okay, that's fine. You can talk about polls, you can talk about this, and you can talk about that. What are folks in the barbershop talking about? Because that's about real talk. So I want to thank you all for the honor of having us here today on behalf of myself and Joe Biden. GK, did he leave already? And Alma Adams, I want to thank the two incredible, not only North Carolinian leaders, but United States leaders.
Yes, yes.
We serve together in the United States Congress. We are all members of the Congressional Black Caucus, and each of them, are powerful, powerful voices, not only for the people of North Carolina, but for all people in our country. So I want to, in their absence, thank them. They greeted me earlier. Councilman Corey Branch, I want to thank, there you are. Thank you for your leadership, and so many others. So listen, I wanted to be here in Raleigh in North Carolina as one of the first trips that I've taken. I'm now officially on the ticket as a vice presidential nominee because one, I love North Carolina and it's so great to come back. But two, there is so much about what happens in North Carolina as a bellwether, as a measure for what's going on in our country, both in terms of its historical strengths, but also in terms of the challenges. The other thing we know about North Carolina is this. North Carolina is a road to the White House. There is no question about that. North Carolina is a road to reaching a majority in the United States Senate, where I now serve. There's no question about that. And so it is you, the leaders of North Carolina, that are going to make a difference and make a decision that is not only about the people of this state, but the people of our nation. Because with you, when you walk into that ballot box or drop that ballot in that box or walk into the polling station, with you, you will carry the future of so many others. So I wanted to come here to pay my respects, but also to thank you and to listen to you and to talk with you, because we are all in this together. We have 36 days to get it done. Early voting in North Carolina starts on Thursday, October 15th. So there's not a minute to waste. And with that, let's get started with our conversation. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you again, Senator Harris. We love having you in North Carolina.
Thank you.
So welcome to Sister Meets Talk Shop, where we are engaging African Americans under 40 in critical conversations about the future of our communities. So for the first question up today, I'd like to welcome John Verdejo for his first question, Senator Harris, for this brief Q&A.
Thank you.
Senator, thank you for coming to North Carolina. It's an honor for you to be here. Thank you. My question to you is this. Speaking as an Afro-Latino, a Black Latino, or Puerto Rican descent, Latinos have been constantly overlooked until election season. How will the Biden-Harris administration ensure that all are included, especially the Black and Brown community?
That's a wonderful question, and it really does highlight what's at stake in the outcome of this election in so many ways. So let's start with, one of the crises that we're facing as a country, which is the COVID pandemic. I think of it both as a crisis that is about a public health crisis. I think of it as an economic crisis. And in many ways, it is about the crisis of long-standing disparities in our country that have been only exacerbated, only highlighted, which speaks to the crisis of systemic racism in our country. So on your point, right now we are looking at the fact that Black folks and Latinos are 3 times as likely to contract this virus, and equally 3 times as likely and twice as likely to die from it. And when we look at those disparities, we know that it's connected with the fact that there's a reflection between those numbers and the pre-existing conditions that existed before the virus hit. This virus is a predator in many ways. It preys on people who have pre-existing conditions. So when you look at the Latino community, when you look at the Black community, and you know that similar in many cases in terms of the pre-existing conditions, things like high blood pressure, things like diabetes are real. And so part of the perspective that Joe and I share is one to acknowledge those racial disparities and then address them. And that's about a plan that we have. For example, by the way, Donald Trump has no plan. Let's just start there. So it's not even like we're contrasting plans. He actually does not have a plan. But our plan, which includes what we need to do around testing, around treatment, and I pray every night that we get a vaccine as soon as possible that is safe, and about distribution of that vaccine. It's about addressing the fact that we need to grow what Barack Obama and Joe Biden created with the Affordable Care Act, and we need to expand it so even more people have coverage, that we need to deal with the expansion in a way that we are dealing not only with the health care from the neck down, but let us also realize we need to also expand health care from the neck up. That's called mental health care, which particularly is an issue for us in our Latino and our Black communities, especially when you look at the high rates of undiagnosed and untreated trauma. Right? I mean, think about it for a moment. Just step back on that point. Poverty is trauma-inducing. We need to diagnose and we need to treat it. It is trauma-inducing that you experience all of the effects of poverty, including violence in communities. All of these things must be addressed and done in a manner that is conscious of the disparities based on race, based on historical disproportionate distribution of resources. One of the biggest issues that we face, again, in terms of disparities, I can go into the history. North Carolina knows it better than most. But one of the issues is what is a challenge in terms of access to capital. So the whites, I'm sure they have long stories about what they did to be smart around acquiring capital to build up your business, knowing that a lot of the traditional sources of access to capital were unavailable to Black, and still are unavailable to Black and brown communities. So Joe Biden and I have a plan that is about $150 billion that is going to be focused on low interest loans and access to capital with an emphasis on Black and brown communities, knowing that our businesses have always traditionally been, again, the source of our economic lifeblood and vitality. So those are a couple of things. I can go into the topic of criminal justice. I think we're going to talk about that in a minute. Education, the disparities there. You look at the fact that our children are supposed to be learning from home right now, but in poor communities, in Black and brown communities, urban communities, as well as rural communities, access to broadband is a real issue. I know it's a real issue here in North Carolina. We're talking about how our children should be learning from home. But first of all, that requires that you have affordable access to broadband if you have access at all. Then, if you have more than one child, do you have access to the technology? Are you going to have that many laptops? So many of our families who have access to Wi-Fi, it's on their cell phone. A child can't learn remotely on a cell phone. These are real issues that will have long-term impact on our communities if we don't see it and address it. And that's part of the plan we have. So I appreciate your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Harris. And again, just your answer to that, being a middle school teacher at a Title I school, definitely a lot of the points that you have made are definitely spot on, especially about mental health, which is so important in the African-American community. We want to turn it over now to our next question, Mr. LeVarn Barnes.
Good evening and welcome back to North Carolina.
Thank you.
And as a proud public school teacher in Durham Public Schools, I got to shout out the School for Creative Studies before I get in trouble.
Yeah.
My question to you is, how will the Biden-Harris ticket propel young men to be able to have a seat at the table of leadership? So that's my question.
All right. So first of all, it requires that you see young men and see in young men leaders. I find myself, it was actually after the Breonna Taylor grand jury decision that came down last week, I was reminded of one of the many sayings that my late mother had. And one of them is she would say to me, Kamala, don't you ever let anybody tell you who you are. You tell them who you are. So when I say that to you, I'm not suggesting I will tell you you are a young leader, and until I anoint you young leader, you are. You're already a young leader. And I'm talking about the fact that I recognize that, and I see that, and I honor that. It means then creating not only access, but an open door with constant access so that your role of leadership can inform the decisions that I make and that we make. So that's about being not only able to walk through the door, but having a seat at the table. On issues, again, like what we were talking about around access to capital. You are both teachers. Title I funding. Joe and I have a part of our plan for Title I funding is that we will triple Title I funding. And for everybody knows Title I funding is about funding that goes to inner city schools, to schools that have low tax base, cities that have schools that have the highest rates of need. It's about what we need to do in terms of leadership on issues that are about education. Not only K through 12, which you are both leaders as educators, but also what we need to do around creating access to employment opportunities based on providing the education that is necessary to have those kinds of jobs. The way I think about it is we got to stop talking just about higher education. I like to say instead, let's think about it as education after high school, and making sure that there are paths that are available for education after high school, because the good jobs, most of them as we go forward, are going to require education after high school. And for some, that's going to be the ability to at some point then walk across the stage with a diploma and a 4-year degree. But for others, that's going to be getting the education so they can get the certificate to qualify for the job that requires that skill. I'm going to need your help figuring out how we make that relevant, how we actually create it as a policy in a way it hits the streets. Because a policy on high means nothing if it doesn't hit the streets. And that's where access, in terms of real leaders who are on the floor, on the ground, will make all the difference if we're going to be relevant. And I can go down the list of the policies that make that so. But also, it's about encouraging you, if you're interested in running for office. It's about being mentors. My mother, again, I'll give you another one of her sayings. She had a lot of them. But she would say to me, Kamala, you may be the first to do many things. Make sure you're not the last. And you can look at both Joe Biden's career and mine to know that mentoring and legacy are very much a way of how we think about our responsibility as leaders. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Levon, for such a critical question. So next, as we keep this ball rolling, I'd like to introduce Mr. Marcus Bass for the next question.
Senator Harris, welcome to North Carolina. Thank you for putting yourself out there as a Black woman in such a pivotal way. We see so much uncertainty in this moment, but one thing we are sure of is that leadership is needed. My question, the perception among many young Black and brown voters is that a Biden-Harris ticket may not be reflective of a hard line on the true reforms necessary in our criminal justice and social economic systems. The better than 45 message alone, with 6 weeks to go, needs a sharper, hard line for the base of voters protesting in this moment right now. How will a Biden-Harris ticket move past the lesser of two evils narrative being used to promote them to young Black voters and get in tune with the issue base of the criminal justice community?
I appreciate the question and the point. So first of all, the premise of your point is something I couldn't agree with more, which is we have to earn the votes. Nobody is supposed to vote for us. We need to earn it. The other point that I think you're raising is something that I agree profoundly with, which is let's step back and decide how we're going to declare a win and how we're measuring the win. How do we define the win? Because here's what I mean. If you define the win as just simply beating Donald Trump, then the job is over the day we get sworn in. But if you define the win as winning, to actually confront the issues, then the job begins the day we're sworn in. So I couldn't agree more with the spirit with which you make the point. Now, specifically on topic, I know as a former prosecutor, and let me give you the background on that. My parents met when they were active in the civil rights movement, marching and shouting. There is not a Black man I know, be he a relative or friend, who has not been the subject of some form of racial profiling, unreasonable stop, or excessive force. I grew up understanding how the system works. And it was the very distrust that so many have today that propelled me to become a prosecutor, because I decided, well, there are many ways to deal with the system. I'm going to choose to go in the system to see if I can't help reform it from the inside, which is why I created some of the first in the nation initiatives. For example, one that focused on young men who were arrested for drug sales and getting them jobs and counseling. It became a national model. So I'm committed to this. This is part of my life's work. Joe and I are very specific about what we will do as a start. Ban chokeholds and carotid holds. George Floyd would be alive today if they had been banned. We will create a national policy for a standard for use of force. What's that about? Well, excessive force right now, when it happens in many jurisdictions, the question to ask is, was that use of force reasonable? Well, as we all know, you could reason away just about anything. The more fair and just question to ask is, was that use of force necessary? Joe and I also have a plan to have a national registry around police officers who have broken the law. Why? Because in many places where there has been excessive force, as an example, because the burden to prove it, see the earlier point I made, is so high, sometimes those cases just go by administrative process. So there's an administrative process and the person gets fired. Well, there's nothing that then follows that person when they move to a different jurisdiction and go get hired there. So we're talking about a national registry. We intend to get rid of the federal death penalty, to decriminalize marijuana and expunge people's records who have been convicted, and to get rid of the private prisons. Why is that important? Because let's be clear.